Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and I am here with Ryan for our VBA Season 4 Power Rankings for the Kanto Division. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing good.
Great, thanks for joining me. Before we get started, I just want to go over a little bit about how the Power Rankings work, especially for those of you who haven't seen these videos before. First thing to note is that these Power Rankings are not predictive. And our methodology is that we assume 100 equally skilled trainers are given each of the 12 teams and put together in a massive round robin, and this is about what the final standings per team we would assume to be. On top of that, power rankings are 100% not predictive. They are merely an exercise in comparing the teams without thinking about the coach at all. And these power rankings, we did our best to make it after the draft and the free period transaction. We should have taken out any transactions that happened in week one. If we missed one, I do apologize about that. But anything you want to add before we get further into it, Ryan?
Not particularly. I do know there has been some transactions. I only know a few of them off the top of my head, so the ones that I am aware of, I will touch on maybe briefly. But I only really, I think, remember some of the bigger ones that have happened. In general, not predictive. There will be some, I think, amusing placements on this one. The other thing with this particular power ranking is that, for me personally, how I organize my power rankings is I rate every team out of 10 and write a big pros and cons list for every team. These PRs were unusually close, and I will be honest, I didn't really love most of the teams this go. It was really like, I think it's 10 through 4 or 3 are all within a point of each other in like the 6 to 7.5-ish range is where I put most of the teams. So there was, just from like a pure theory crafting standpoint, most of these teams were ridiculously close. Even on my PRs and on Dan's, I believe, too. I know Dan said that he had a lot of close ones. So when I did my personal ranking, just know, even if you get a pretty low ranking or a pretty high ranking, it's not, these are a lot closer than usual. And that just kind of is what it is. There was a lot of strong pros and a lot of strong cons for basically every team this go.
Yeah, through the middle rankings especially, I can agree. And as you guys can see on the screen, we've got a red ice with a giant red X through it. Part of that, I think, has to do with the tier list and draft format of the VBA, which is always fun, but they banned every legendary Pokemon, which means they banned some powerful things, and then they also banned things like Regice. And then the tier distribution did have some weird, wonky things with it, with basically every good special attacker being higher than a generally agreed upon equivalent physical attacker. So a lot of the teams end up physical heavy, and a lot of the valued Pokemon were physical as well. So some of the less valuable picks that were actually mandatory were these special picks. So we have to keep all that in mind while we are looking through these power rankings.
We will be talking about people who got good value on the tier list.
Yes.
Without question.
But with that being said, let's go ahead and look at our number 12 ranked team. We've got the Worcester Stunisks. I always butcher that first name, so I apologize, Curry. But this is coached by Curry Puff. This team is Indeedee, Melodic, Ferrothorn, Darmanitan, Aromatisse, Hawlucha, Absol, Crustle, Greedent, Drizzile, and Emolga. And I believe he traded the Darmanitan for a Cantonian Ninetales that was effective in a later week. So, looking at this team, first we got to talk about some of the good things. Indeedee is really strong in a lot of formats, specifically this one. Hawlucha is a decent Unburden abuser. Usually I prefer one with speed control, and Hawlucha losing Tailwind this generation kind of hurts it, but otherwise it's pretty solid. Aromatisse is one of the most consistent Trick Room setters, especially next to Indeedee. It's going to be functionally impossible to stop Trick Room unless you are imprisoning Trick Room. And then you've got some decent power hitters in the Darmanitan, which is now Ninetales, and the Absol as well, and the Crustle is a setup threat next to the Indeedee. But overall, looking at this team, I think part of the big detriment is it outside of that Darmanitan, which again isn't on the team anymore, it doesn't have a lot of immediacy with its damage. Everything requires a boost in the form of the Melodic, or it's really slow and setup heavy with the Ferrothorn, or it's a Drizzile or Greedent that really wants to get Belly Drum off. Like, there are some things with damage output, but just the damage output overall on this team is a big issue point for me. And then looking at the low tiers, although I do think he got decent value with the Absol, Crustle, and Greedent, which were all tier 4 picks, I think the Drizzile and Emolga are a little bit lacking on this team. But what do you think of the Stunfisks, Ryan?
A lot of the same things. We're going to be talking a lot about speed tiers as well.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be across the board for most every team. Not every team, but a lot of them have either their high-end or low-end speed tiers are lacking in some way. This team has very good low-end speed tiers, with some of the higher-end speed tiers lacking a bit. Lucha and Darm are kind of really carrying that a little bit. So that does make me like the Ninetales trade a little bit better, but without the Sun Abuser, I'm not sure on that. The output from the team, I do think it's got a nice mix of special and physical. I think the Trick Room mode is the most solid thing on this team. I think, like, in DDF, Aromatisse, Pharaoh, and Milo, and even that Crustle work really, really well together. I've seen Absol actually pop off in draft before, but not usually on Psychic Terrain teams, because it doesn't have a great speed stat, so it's nice to let it be able to, because I think it gets priority Sucker Punch still. And that's kind of its big nuke move that it can kind of use. I actually like Emolga better than you do. It's kind of a Dollar Tree Zapdos, and that's okay. That's not an awful role for a Pokemon to have. Motor Drive's pretty good. And I really, really like the Crustle and Greedent. I actually think those are two of my favorite picks on the team. I think they glue it together nicely, and even without a boost, Crustle can usually output pretty solid damage, and it's a good max option for a lower tier mon. Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, it really came down to that this is a team where the skill cap for prep is very high, in that you need to spend a substantive amount of time in prepping to make a lot of things work, which isn't always a bad thing, and Curry is a coach who kind of excels at that. But we can't take the coach into account. If I gave this team to any coach ever, it is pretty likely that they wouldn't be able to. This team doesn't have the same tools a lot of other teams have, and it doesn't have the immediate output, and it requires a lot of careful planning to get the most out of, to the point where that skill cap of difficulty makes it really hard to rank particularly high. And I do think that some of the speed tier stuff, some of the damage output stuff, and a few of the picks weren't as synergistic, I think, is what kind of held the team back for me personally. But I like it. I mean, it's cool. I will say this is definitely one of the more interesting teams on the list by a lot. So
yeah, absolutely. I think I generally agree with that, but I'm going to let you handle our number 11 team first, which is the Springfield Spoinks, coached by Other Ryan.
Yeah, hello, Other Ryan. So Springfield Spoinks, this is a pretty interesting team in that we'll kind of go into it, but their placement might seem a little odd at first, especially at first glance. So they have Dragapult, one of the best mons in the format. That's not a surprise, especially with all the legendaries banned. Gyarados, Chandelure, Crocodile, G-Max Butterfree, Gardevoir, Mienshao, Vanillux, Barbaracle, Maractus, and Steelix. So this team, especially when you first look at it, you're like, wow, this is like really strong. It's got a Gyarados, Dragapult, Chandelure, in my opinion, was one of the better mons in Tier 2, 145 special attack. In Tier 2 is pretty insane. Crocodile's always pretty consistent in max formats. G-Max Butterfree is, in my opinion, one of the best value picks on the list in Tier 3. That thing is kind of really, really strong, both as a redirector and support option, and even as a surprise max if needed. Not that this team particularly wants it in that role. I generally really like Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir has a really underrated toolkit, both with its support moves and just offensive output. It's also a Shadow Sneak proc for the Dragapult and Chandelure, which I like. Vanillix also has an Ice Shard proc, but in general, Vanillix is really good just for speed control. It's really good if you Scarf it, that sort of stuff, and it can do a lot of damage. Barbaracle has okay setup options. Maractus has Storm Drain for the Shandy Crocodile, and then the Steelix is kind of the only TR-Mon on this team, which we'll get to in a second. So this team, unlike the last team, has a lot of output, but this team has just... the defensive synergy is just not there on this team at all. Fairy and Ghost type moves are ridiculously free into this team. It's got, like, if you're able to just, like, run, like, Max Starfall, like, there are so few switches on this team for that, that aren't Steelix, which is one of your low tiers. But that's one of the big issues, is that I love Dragapult and Chandelure, but they also share a lot of the same weaknesses, and then Chandelure even overlaps weaknesses with Crocodile. And then Gyarados and Butterfree are both great picks, but they both also share a lot of the same weaknesses. Gardevoir has that Ghost weakness, which is really bad on a team that's already kind of struggling into a lot of Ghost types. Mienshau's weak to Starfall, Vanillix just is kind of frail in the first place, and that's where the issue comes in. This team defensively has a backbone that is extremely easy to exploit and break. We kind of already saw that. This is a slight spoiler, but if you want to watch Spoinks versus the Grimmsnarls, Max Clefable came out, which is not a mon that usually would come out, but because the backbone of this team defensively is so exploitable in that instance, and Max Clefable was easily able to kind of overwhelm this team, and I made this ranking before I saw that game. So, that is sort of why it ended up here, because even with all of this output, it doesn't have the ability to eat the hits it needs to eat to win. Also, the TR, the speed tiers on the high end are great. However, it has two Imprison Trick Room abusers, and then really no TR mode, which is pretty scary when in a division with actually really good TR teams around every corner. What do you got, Dan?
Yeah, this is a team that initially when I looked at it, I really liked it, but then the more I looked at it, and especially because I prepped against it for week one, just sort of the more defensively exploitable I found it to be. I'm going to classify it the way I will a couple other teams, but this is a team that's great if it has the speed advantage, but is really bad if the opponent is ever moving first. Because, you know, if this team has the speed advantage, you're Dragapulting, you're Chandeluring, you're just hitting things with massive attack stats, you're killing a lot of things. But if the opponent's ever moving first, there's just so many shared weaknesses that if you can tech, like, Dazzling Gleam Shadow Ball on a Pokemon, you can hit most of this team, and without a lot of good switch-ins. It's just an issue that this team's really going to struggle with throughout the season, I think, is that sort of defensive consistency and how free certain attacks are into it. So I generally agree with a lot of what you said. I do think the Butterfree was really good value in its tier. I think the Gardevoir, even if he does use it as a Scarf Icy Wind bot a lot of the time, is going to have a lot of flexibility and it's going to be very important on this team. But again, that shares that Ghost weakness with Chandelure and Dragapult. Mm-hmm. And I just think that that's sort of a consistent thread with this team. But with that being said, I'll take our 10th place team, which is the Salty Suicunes, which is Garchomp, Gmax Snorlax, Togetic, Weezing, Gourgeist, Magmortar, Magneton, Mantine, Purloin, Linoon G, and Seeking. So, first things first with this team, love Mantine in Tier 4.
Yeah,
that's
why is that thing still in Tier 4? Like, it carried your season a few seasons back. It's so good.
Yeah, Mantine is a great Pokemon. That's maybe... Well, no, I'm not going to say maybe the highest value pick in the league because there are some even higher ones.
There's a couple that are way higher, but it's pretty high value,
It's pretty high value, and I think it actually pairs really well with Garchomp because it's got that quad electric weakness, and Garchomp has the quad ice weakness, and they can switch in decently well for each other, especially since most ice moves are special, and Mantine's got that great special defense. Snorlax is a great Trick Room mon, and it works really well with Ghost-type setters. Generally, you see it with Mimikyu, but with Gourgeist, I think it's going to be pretty similar. And again, Garchomp is Garchomp, which is just going to be fairly solid throughout this league. But looking at the team overall, I do think that there are a couple of issues, specifically with output. Outside of the Garchomp and Snorlax, I don't think anything on this team has great output, like, at all initially. Mantine, to some extent, can set itself up with the rain, and that's fine. Yeah. Magmortar's okay, but, man, the overall output of this team really struggles, and synergistically, I'm just not sure it's all the way there outside of those sort of top-end synergies. This is a team, I'm not going to say it's worse than the sum of its parts, but it's equal to the sum of its parts, in that the synergies within what was drafted doesn't add a lot to the base value of the Pokemon themselves. And I think that's the biggest downside of this team. Again, we are now in the range where every team between this and like 3 are very, very similar. So this is really nitpicking this one compared to the teams that are following it. But that's sort of my overall impression of this team. It's that it's just slightly worse than the teams ahead of it. A lot of it because of some of the initial output, some speed control issues, and a lot of everything relies on this Mantine. Like, you need the Mantine for Tailwind, you need the Mantine to have a max option that isn't the Garchomp, you need the Mantine to switch into bad hits. Like, it's very, very reliant on Mantine as a tier 4, which, you know, Mantine might be an awesome tier 4 for that, but it's still not very bulky on the physical side. But what do you think overall of the Suicunes, Ryan?
Yeah, I really like the Purloin pick. I do want to comment on that.
That
Purloin
was great.
Purloin was a insane amount of value for the pick. And it does actually make me like the team a little bit better. I think Purloin, like Magmortar, is pretty good. And I kind of like what it's doing. One of my biggest issues with this team actually boils down to that a lot of the output, I think you're really honing in on Mantine, because a lot of the output is physical. And they're not particularly great into, like, Skill Spike on the whole. Which I always worry about on teams where it does lean pretty physical, is it's like, okay, what are your, like, skill spike resists? And it's like Magneton CK, and it's like, okay, that is, and Mantine. And the Mantine is great, don't get me wrong, but it is still physically frail. So I am worried a little bit about skill spike boosting out of control. One thing with Togetic, in particular, you want to be careful about is that when you have Togetic has a lot more weaknesses than most redirectors. So you want to make sure that whatever you are pairing Togetic with doesn't share any of those major weaknesses, right? And so if you do something like Togetic Garchomp or Togetic Snorlax, and the opponent goes, okay, I'm going to get my +1 defense boost on Togetic for free, or I'm going to click an Ice move into the Garchomp slot because Togetic because it'll still kill, either Pokemon. That always worries me a little bit. I think Togetic works best as a redirector when it is not paired with something that shares a bunch of its weaknesses. That's why I usually prefer it with special attackers and with things that have synergistic typing with it, like dragon types. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, it is paired with a dragon type here, but you know what I mean. Dragon types that aren't 4x weak to ice. So, in general, though, the team, I do like a lot of the toolkits on it. I think Gourgeist is very fun. I think Weezing gives you... On a team like this, Weezing actually fits really well. I don't think a lot of these mons really need or necessitate their abilities. So having a Weezing here to shut down some of the opposing teams where there are some ability-reliant Pokemon is really nice. I think the Purloin is good. But yeah, this team, I think you put it really well when you mentioned that you like all the individual pieces, but they don't all come together in that synergistic way. This team is kind of like when you have a Lego box, and you're just kind of messing around with it, and then the guy in the corner is following his carefully made, like, super cool looking Death Star thing,
Yeah, I can definitely see that analogy a little bit. Not a bad team by any means, but tougher to pilot successfully because of the lack of inherent synergy between it. But with that being said, why don't you take our number 9 team, the Coughing Smokers?
Yeah, I will say about this team, when I first glanced at this team, immediately after the draft finished, I went, okay, I don't know about this one. And then he put Araquanid on the team. And then I went, okay, this team I like now. Pretty simple. I'm a simple man. I see my water spider. I like the team better. But in all seriousness, so we'll talk a little bit about the Smokers team. So we have Grimmsnarl G-Max, P2, Araquanid, Crobat, Luxray, Magnezone, Flapple, Sandaconda, Togepi, Heatmore, and Rotom. I actually quite like this team, and this is one of those teams I liked the more I looked at it, and I didn't like it less the more I looked at it, which is always a good thing. So Grimmsnarl can obviously do support stuff with fake out and screens and fake tears and yada 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 yada. People know what Grimmsnarl does. The thing I actually want to comment about this team that I actually really like about the G-Max Grimmsnarl is that I really like how it pairs with Crobat on this team, because G-Max Grimmsnarl, one of its big things is that it does have 120 attack, and it's actually got a pretty solid move pool, and I feel like this is a team that, especially with Crobat Tailwind support, can actually make use of a really good, like, max G-Max Grimmsnarl to, like, get surprising, like, huge amounts of damage off. So I really like that not only is this Grimmsnarl able to set screens for a very bulky team on the whole, to give it that longevity it needs to get a lot of that big damage off, I also like that it can also operate in an offensive capacity consistently with that Crobat. So that's really cool. Porygon 2, very good mon. I do think in draft on this team, I would have preferred to see it with something with like a fake tears kind of option, because I feel like the value of P2 comes in the fact that it is a offensive Trick Room mon and Trick Room setter, and I don't really love that it's the only setter on this team, because it tends to be really weak to taunt, and this team really likes TR. I already mentioned my love of Araquanid, but Araquanid is a really good Pokemon, guys. Like, it's so strong. It's one of the better Tier 2 mons. I like it quite a bit on this team. Luxray and Magnezone, I don't super love. I feel like there's a lot of role redundancy there. They both are mons that suffer from the same sort of weaknesses, where they're both kind of low-speed electric types, and they both, share the Quake weakness, and I don't know. I don't feel like both really make a lot of sense. I feel like you're losing a lot of value in that slot. For my money, honestly, on this team, I would probably drop Luxray and keep the Zone. That would be my opinion, but if you feel like you want that Intimidate option / Guts physical option. But I think the special output from Zone's really important for this team. But yeah, I think that's just really redundant, and I feel like that's just adding some weaknesses to the team. Flapple is okay. Flapple's one of those mons that can pop off, as a hustle max option. It definitely has potential. I've seen it pop off before. But I will say that I think Flapple is super inconsistent. Sandaconda G-Max is a great pickup, along with Togepi. Getting Follow Me Redirection in a low tier like that's really good. Sandaconda is super consistent. It's a really nice, like, bulky ground type. It's also a good max option. Heatmore is actually a surprisingly solid fire type. It's not gonna, absolutely crush all the competition in its way, like PDPL will have you believe, but Heatmore is quite good. And then Rotom is a very nice value pick. Rotom offers this team a lot. There are 3 electric types, but Rotom also has Levitate, so I don't actually mind the Rotom as much here. Big issue with this team, in my opinion, is that it's the consistency of the TR mode is a little scary, because P2 is the only setter. I think I'd prefer if, like, the Luxray or Magnezone, either or, was dropped for a second TR setter, so that way that mode is more consistent.
So he did drop the Luxray for Espeon. I don't know if Espeon gets Trick Room.
Okay, moving on from that odd decision. The other thing with this team is that the when I'm looking at it down the line, this might sound like a weird critique, but I've played with a lot of these mons before, particularly the Araquanid and Magnezone, and some of the big hitters on this team are mons that I've used quite a bit in draft. Coverage is actually a slight issue for this team, as in like having enough coverage moves. Grimmsnarl as a max option can be held back by the fact that its coverage isn't excellent. P2 isn't the exception to this. P2 has wonderful coverage, but I don't know, again, without a really good fake tiers, I'm not sure how good P2 will be consistently as a max option. Araquanid, as strong as Water Bubble is, occasionally you run into stuff that does wall it. It's pretty rare, but there are some things that can wall it, which can be problematic. Crobat's not really an offensive Pokemon. Magnezone has an atrocious move pool. Like, Electric Steel hits a lot, but you don't get anything else. Like, it's pretty bad. Flappl's coverage is meh. Sanaconda's is actually pretty good, but, like, Heatmore's is pretty good. So, like, just your ability to... There's not a lot of things on this team with, like, deep move pools, if that makes sense. There's not a ton of Pokemon where the move pool and the options and the tech options go super deep, to the point where I feel like the thing I love about the Grimmsnarl on this team is that it can use all of its move pool because this team is allowing it to, but I feel like a lot of mons on this team don't really have a move pool that's even that deep in the first place, if that makes sense. So I feel like some of that prep linearity will probably catch up with you late in the season, if you're not careful. So what do you got, Dan?
Yeah, I think the Araquanid free period trade was huge for this team. Araquanid can functionally use a move that has 3,954 base power under the right conditions, which is, well, that's a lot of base power. So it is very, very powerful, and I think it's going to be the main attacking option on this team outside of potentially that Grimmsnarl. I think you covered a lot of it. My main critique of this team initially was that it is one of the best support teams, but really soft to taunt, especially priority taunt in a lot of different ways. But then the Araquanid, I really think, balanced out the offenses of the team. I still don't think the offenses are all the way where you want them to be because of the coverage issues you were mentioning. But overall, like, it's a solid team. Araquanid's going to potentially lead the league in kills on a team like this because it's going to need to carry this team. So I think if you can successfully attack the Araquanid, you're going to be able to successfully attack this team, but it's a lot harder said than done. But I do think you covered it pretty well considering your experience with a lot of these Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
But moving on, in number 8, we have the Great Lakes Grimmsnarls, coached by Wakeman. I don't know if he's the Great Lake Grimmsnarls or Great Lake Aces anymore. I'm leaving it as the Grimmsnarls, though.
Fair enough.
So here we've got Clefable, Excadrill, Barraskewda, Rotom-Mow, Hippowdon, Noivern, Scrafty, Turtonator, Audino, Haunter, and Laleep. This is another one of the teams that I liked less the more as I looked at it. Initially you're like, oh, Clefable, Excadrill, and you can set Sand, and you've got Barraskewda and Rotom to supplement the damage, and Noivern gives you Tailwind support. And then you've got Scrafty, Turton, Audino as a Trick Room mode, and then I stopped and I said, and then you've got Scrafty, Turton, Audino as a Trick Room mode, and I realized this team is super soft to Trick Room, and Haunter and Laleep aren't great. Like, Haunter does do some things, like, decently. Laleep, I guess, is Storm Drain. Like, it'll come against the Araquanid team. But, there are some problems with this team in that it is incredibly soft to opposing Trick Room. It has 3 Pokemon that could be devoted to it, but those 3 don't really want to come with the hyper-offensive skeleton that is what most of this team is. So if they do come, it's a detraction from that, and even if they do come, it's going to be worse than a lot of opposing Trick Room modes. And I think that's my main problem with this team. Like, yes, the offensive output, phenomenal. The weather mode, I love Excadrill in the format. Noivern is a very decent Tailwind setter. I'm a big fan of it. I think Rotom as a special attacker really balances this team because Rotom and Noivern are like the two main special attackers, maybe Turtonator to some extent. But this is a team that's really physical heavy. Your Clefable's going to be out a lot, and it's just going to eat a lot of Steel Spikes. And then your Trick Room mode I don't actually think is that good, which I think that's a lot of Pokemon for a mode that isn't very good in the Scrafty Turt and Audino. So that's one of my main critiques of this team. Again, I think the offensive output of this team is one of the better ones in the league, but defensively, it has a lot of things that are frail. There's going to be a lot of reliance on the Clefable, and the fact that so much of the offense is physical and Clefables is the most notorious Steel Spike eater in the game, I think is going to be less than ideal for this team. And then again, you just set Trick Room against it and have whatever you have in Trick Room beat Turtonator, and you're going to be pretty good. Yeah, I think that covers the gist of it. Offensive, great. Fast mode, great. Needs speed control. Doesn't like Steel Spike. But what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, Hippowdon can work pretty well in Trick Room. I don't want to discount that, especially something like Yon Hippowdon, which I know he's already running, which that's good. Yeah, a lot of it really is I got lost in a lot of the lower picks. I think the Scrafty, Turtonator, Leap in particular lost me. Audino makes some sense. I really like Haunter here too, actually. I think Haunter fits and kind of covers some roles he needed. But yeah, the frailty of some of those Pokemon have me a little worried. And I don't really, and I like the redirection, especially I like Clefable Scuda a lot, and Clefable Rotom a lot. I think those are really nice pairings. But in general, yeah, I would agree that there is a little bit that questioning of some of the output on the physical end while having Clefable as the redirector, and I do think that that Trick Room mode and some of those lower tier picks are really what loses me on this team. I feel like, though, that top core of Mons is really good and really synergistic. Like, all the way down to Noivern, I'm, like, insanely on board with this team. So, if some of those lower tier picks kind of get reorganized in a way where you're getting more value out of them, I do think this team bumps quite a bit on the PRs, like, a lot. Like I said, these PRs were pretty close, so we did have to get pretty nitpicky in general with quite a few teams, so if these lower tier picks were different, he shoots up very high. Hippowdon, by the way, I think is one of the best values on the tier list. In tier 3, that thing was kind of ridiculous.
Compared to some of the other things in tier 3, Hippowdon is mid.
That's kind of true. Most of the value on this list was tier 3, guys. So, that is sort of my opinion. I think it's a pretty solid team. I think Excadrill in particular, when you remove all the legendaries, Excadrill all of a sudden is one of the best Pokemon I think around, and having something that potent is really, really strong. So, yep,
I can agree with all of that, but I will let you take our next team, the Morenza Morpicos. I don't know. Morpicos. Go ahead.
I'm about to say, I'm enough Italian, I was allowed to do that. Anyway, so let's see. We have Hatterene G-Max, Braviary, Darmanitan G, Escavalier, Drampa, Nidoking, Tangela Throw, Torcat Lantern, and Morpico. I actually think this team has a nice mix of really good special offense and physical offense, which is pretty hard to do. I think that the Morpico in tier 5 is actually kind of ridiculous. Morpico is so strong for a tier 5 Pokemon. It's usually a tier 4 and like a pretty good tier 4 at that, so getting that in tier 5 is really nice. Fake Out, Parting Shot, Aura Wheel's an absolute nuke. The Electric Dark typing is surprisingly good. So that was a nice pick. Anyway, going into the team itself though, to me the most threatening thing on this team is probably the Trick Room mode. Hatterene, Escavalier, Drampa is just a lot. Like, that's really hard to beat. And then you compare it with the Tangela redirection, which isn't as reliable as I'd like it to be. We'll go into that in a second. But The Hat is kind of the primary Trick Room setter. It's also one of the better offensive options for this team. Darmg is a really insanely strong physical attacker, and I like it paired with a Braviary. Braviary not only supplying Tailwind for this team, but also just offering another good physical max option's great. Having the Dragon Fairy Steel Core all function in Trick Room is kind of insane. I really can't undersell how strong this Trick Room mode is. In theory, we're going to get to practice here in a second. Nidoking's great. It is an absolute nuke of a Pokemon. It can be either physical or special. It can pick up KOs on a lot of Pokemon with relative ease once Dynamax is over. That's the big thing with Nidoking, is that it's a bit of a weird piece to work with because it doesn't really get its full effectiveness until the things that max are dead. Because it doesn't really pick up the KOs it needs to, typically. Tangle is quite nice. I really like the Tangle pick here. Throw's okay. It can do some stuff. I don't think a fighting type was super important on this team. Torcat is funny. Everyone thinks Torcat's this insane Pokemon. It's really not. Yes, it gets Intimidate and Parting Shot and Will-O-Wisp, but it has really bad 4-move slot syndrome, and even with Eviolite, I find that it dies to a lot of things. But having a secondary Fake-Out option is good, and I actually think Intimidate's really important for this team, especially with Hat and the Durampo being two of the more important mons. I think that having that Intimidate Will-O-Wisp support is going to be really important. And I already talked about Morpeko. Lantern's kind of a dead slot, I'm not going to lie, but is what it is. My main issue with this team is that I love the Trick Room mode, but the setting of it's a little inconsistent. Because the Hat G-Max has to set TR, because there's no other TR setter on this team, and I really don't like that. When I kind of wish it could just max while something clicks TR next to it. I think that inconsistency is kind of what gets me. The speed tiers on this team are fine, but not awesome. The high-end speed tiers in particular, it's not too bad to outspeed, but most teams have pretty bad speed control issues, so that's kind of it. The reason this team is where it is it does have really good output, and if the Hat can get off Trick Room, that mode's very hard to stop. And I actually think the Tailwind mode, with like Braviary, Darmg, Nidoking, that sort of thing, with some more Pico support, is very hard to stop too. If I were Raz, I would look into getting a second Trick Room setter to create some ease of prep, because that is probably the biggest thing, is that there isn't a huge ease of prep with some elements of this team.
Yeah, looking at this team, Raz is the one person in the division I do not play in the regular season, so I feel very confident in saying I would have put safety goggles on Metagross, and then he's struggling to get Trick Room up. Because the Tangela can't redirect it at that point. And I think if that Tangela was Follow Me instead of Rage Powder, we're having a very different conversation, but Follow Me is much more expensive, obviously. I agree a lot with what you said. If this team gets Trick Room up, it's going to win 85 to 90% of the games that Trick Room is up, because that means you've got Escavalier, Drampa, and Hatterene operating under Trick Room, and that just kills people so quickly. Like, Drampa's output is ridiculous, and it might be the worst of the three Trick Room Pokemon on this team. So I really, really like this Trick Room mode. One of the better ones in the league. And then, like you said, it can also operate the fast mode pretty effectively. But I think this team has the problem in that as soon as you see the 6 that are brought, you're going to know whether it's going to be Trick Room or fast mode most of the time. Because if it brings all 3 of its Trick Room Pokemon, that means at least one of them will have to come to every game. So it's hard to do that and have a functional fast mode with basically 3 Pokemon that operate well under Tailwind. I guess you could run some speed on Drampa, for example, and give it a room service, but it's not the most consistent thing. So that's part of my main issue with this team, is that both of its modes require, at least 3 Pokemon to function within them when you have to bring 4, so you can't bring both modes that consistently. But otherwise, I really like a lot of what this team is doing. I do think it's, like I said, the Trick Room mode is just so good, and I do think Braviary Nidoking Darm is going to be enough to keep people honest, to not just prep hard anti-Trick Room, but we really need to see how consistently Raz is willing to bring that kind of mode, and maybe leave the Tangela on the bench some weeks, and be able to keep people honest, because if people are just able to prep for the Trick Room mode, it's going to be a lot harder for the Trick Room to go up.
Yeah, I'd agree. Also, Morpiko's really good on both modes, in my opinion. Anyway.
Yes, Morpeko is great. Lantern is the worst Pokemon on this team. But, moving on, got the Midwest Megafaunas, coached by Matt Zilla, who is a new coach this season. He's got Incineroar, Bisharp, Conkeldurr, Politoed, Seismitoad, Boltund, Runerigus, Gothorita, Eldegoss, Machoke, Shedinja. Okay, so let's start with some of the obvious things here. The Trick Room mode on this team is very, very solid. Conkeldurr hits so hard. You don't really want to intimidate it because you're afraid of the Bisharp. And the Runerigus is one of the better, more consistent setters as a fake-out immune Trick Room setter. So it's pretty good. The offensive output with the Politoed Seismitoad, I know he recently dropped the Seismitoad for Kingdra, which is probably actually an... What?
Bless.
Yeah, it's probably actually an upgrade.
God fucking... I was really hoping he'd do that, and then he did it, and I was like, God... By the way, in terms of ranking, I was a little higher on this team than Dan. I really like this team when I first looked at it, and so...
Yeah, it's definitely a solid team. Incineroar is one of the more skill-heavy Pokemon that you can use in draft, because there are so many different sets you can run with it, and then you really need to know how to switch it in and out pretty safely. And then the rain mode does threaten a lot on this team as well. So, like, overall, there's no denying that this is a very, very solid team. I do think some of the lower tiers, it doesn't get the best use out of. Like, the Gothorita's great, but the bottom three... I mean, he could punk some people with Shedinja, but Eldegoss, Machoke, they're functionally dead slots on this team because Machoke's never better than Conkeldurr. And Eldegoss, this isn't Pokemon Unite. So it's not as good as some other things. But overall, like, it's a solid team with good output. It's going to be able to get up Trick Room pretty consistently because it's got Gothorita and Runerigus as potential setters. It can trap things in with Gothorita for favorable lead matchups and make leading against this team pretty hard. And then the Incineroar, I'm very split on Incineroar. Some days I think it's a great draft Pokemon, some days I think it's a horrible draft Pokemon. I think on this team it tends closer to the great draft Pokemon, but I do wish that he didn't have an additional quad week to fighting Pokemon that was paired with it, which is one of my biggest critiques with that Bisharp. Like, I understand what Bisharp's doing. I think it's very important on this team to have something like the Bisharp, but offensively, like, they're both weak to ground, they're both weak to fighting. Like, it's very tough to get that rocking and rolling. So I think if that Bisharp was a Braviary, let's just big hypothetical, I know Braviary's not a free agent right now, this team might be top 3. But the fact that it's a Bisharp, I think is holding this team back a bit. But what do you think, Ryan?
I'd agree with that. I think actually the big thing with this team that I kind of hold against it is some of the defensive stuff. I think having Incin, Bisharp, Politoed all weak to ground, and Max Quake is pretty even solid into something like a Politoed, even though it's not weak to it. Just getting yourself Spidef boosts is nice. Yeah, I'd agree too. I think some of the low-tier picks are pretty dead, especially Machoke, Shedinja. Shedinja's way harder to make works in max formats versus non-max, I think. I've basically never seen it do anything other than win a game off Cheeky Ally Switch. That is the best I've ever seen Shedinja do. Shoutouts to that set. That was tilting to watch. And Eldegoss, I think you're underrating a little bit. It's got some bulk to it. It's got Sleep Powder. It's got some kind of unique ability stuff it can do. But yeah, it's not doing a ton here. I don't think it's a mon that this team is going to be inclined to bring often. While I did rate this team with the Seismitoad in this slot, one of my critiques of the team was the Seismitoad instead of Kingdra. So I will say this team probably gets bumped a bit even on my list, and I liked this team just for the Kingdra trade, like straight up. I think that is pretty much pure upgrade. So even in its current standing at 6, I probably would have bumped it up a couple slots on my own personal list just for that. But yeah, I think some of the defensive things you talked about. Also, I do like Incineroar here. I think it complements most of the Pokemon really well. I really like Incineroar. Boltund. I really like how Incin pairs with Conkeldurr, that sort of stuff. I think it's really good in the Trick Room mode. I like Incineroar with the Runerigus as well. My big critique, though, is that you do have Incineroar on an actual Rain team, or at least with a really good Rain mode. So I do think it does open up opposing Geysers into Incineroar a little bit. That's not a huge knock, but it's a slight knock that I do think we should at least say. I like the speed tiers on this team. Having the Rain mode, and then the Boltund helps, and then the main other backbone of the team is TR, and it feels like that backbone is TR. I think it's a nice multifaceted team. I think there's things that work in various modes on this team. It's pretty good. I'm a big fan of it. I do think Conkeldurr is a little... Getting the guts off consistently is something I'm really curious to see. Conkeldurr's not picked often in draft, in my experience, so I am curious how frequently you're able to get that kind of Flame War boosted Conkeldurr going. So, I'm very excited for this one, though. Definitely one of the more, in some ways, untraditional teams that I'm kind of looking forward to the most.
Yeah, it'll be really fun to track him throughout the season. I agree with that. But up next, I'll let you take Joshiwaji's team, the Jubilee City Jirachis.
Yeah, this is a team that I have a lot of mixed feelings on, but I do like a lot of what it's doing. So it's got Charizard G-Max, Rillaboom G-Max, Blastoise, Sableye, Drifblim, Ludicolo, Fungus, Jinx, Berserker, Double, and Rhydon. So I want to talk a little bit about Ludicolo and Zard here for a sec. And also Rillaboom Fungus. Because that is where a lot of the things I like about this team and a lot of the things I don't like about this team are all happening at once. So Sableye. One of your tier 1 picks is... I've actually talked with Joshi about his team, so there's not going to be anything new here for him, from my end at least. Charizard, to get the most damage and to be a worthy tier 1 Pokemon, needs Sun. Sableye is the best draft setter for Sunny Day, period. It cannot be Prankster taunted because of its dark typing, and it cannot be faked out because of its ghost typing. So it always clicks Sunny Day for free for this Charizard, and then can proceed to quash anything that outspeeds the Charizard. That's super, super nice. I really, really like that. My issue is that there's also a Ludicolo here that you can say the same about with Rain Dance, and while in some mindsets it's like, oh, well, that's kind of cool, because on one hand you have to prep for both Rain and Sun, and it's like, effectively you don't, because Sableye doesn't want to spend 2 of its move slots on both Sunny Day and Rain Dance, and Zard is kind of just gonna be strictly better in most matchups anyway. So I don't really know how much I like that, because there isn't a Rain setter on this team for the Ludi. That, like, there is other things that can set Rain. You know, Drifblim can set Rain. Jinx, I think, gets Rain Dance. Like, there's things that can click Rain, but, like, in terms of just Prankster +1, I get my Rain Dance up and I start killing stuff. Sableye is going to be your go-to. So I don't super love how that looks from a prep angle. And that is it, because I think Zard G-Max without Sun is all of a sudden a really bad tier 1. Because it's got a 4x weakness to Rock. So, and then also with Ludi, Rillaboom, and Fungus, that is 3 grass types on a team. And grass is notably not a very good defensive type. I think Airstream is really good into this team on the whole. As in, like, it's free, which I don't like very much. I don't like when teams, you can kind of just click max Airstream to get your whatever going. But now I pivot to the things I like about it. Rillaboom Drifblim is one of my favorite leads in draft. It's super strong. It's super oppressive. I love the Rillaboom paired with Charizard. And I know he dropped Blastoise and kept Ludi, but I like a good Firewater Grass, and I feel like we do have that here. and I think that's going to be really strong. I like the mix of special and physical offense on this team. I really like some of the low-tier support picks. I think the Fungus, even though I do not like that it's a grass type, I do think that redirection is going to be kind of good for some of the mons on this team. I think Jinx is extremely underrated. It's very strong. Lovely Kiss is an incredibly good move. Do you want a fast Pokemon with Fake Out, Icy Wind, and basically Sleep Powder? Yeah, I kind of do. Very, very good Pokemon. Berserker isn't as good in Max as compared to non-Max, but even still, really nice, solid attacking mon. It's good at like cleaning stuff up. I think the Rhydon, I don't like Rhydon a lot because of its weaknesses. It still tends to die even through Eviolite and stuff, but having Lightning Rod on this team is really, really good and kind of important, so I like it. And Double's not bad. It's kind of a cheeky Pokemon. And I actually think this team can operate somewhat well in TR, despite not having TR in of itself, because Sableye, Quash, and Fungus operate as enough TR deterrent in of them, and Berserker even, operate as enough TR deterrent in of themselves, with Quash and Fungus clicking insanely fast spores and TR, and Berserker just hitting like a truck. I think those elements kind of sell me on the team, and it's got good output, it's got a nice mix of physical special. I do think that I don't love how... I end up not liking, even though the weather mode does have the versatility of having multiple weathers, I think that the fact that most of it funnels through through Sableye, and the fact that you have 3 grass types and like no good airstream resist essentially effectively no great airstream resist, kind is what puts this team down for me a bit. But I do like it on the whole. I think it's a pretty good team. I think it deserves its spot here. What do you got, Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a notable weakness to max airstream on this team, which is a huge deal in a max format, considering airstream is probably the best max move possible. And the triple grass Pokemon I'm not a huge fan of. And then, like you were saying, double weather is really weird because you're not bringing in both. And the answer to either is actually... The answer to weather is pretty similar no matter what kind of weather it is. Like, I know there's going to be some differences between Charizard answers and Ludicolo answers, obviously. But
it's get hailstorm or it's get hail or sand up.
Yeah, but it's answer the weather, and I think that sort of redundancy makes it a bit less consistent, and I think having to choose, okay, do I want to go with my rain mode or do I want to go with my sun mode, is a bit of an issue for this team. And then looking at it, Rillaboom really wants to work in the rain mode, but that'll give you multiple grass Pokemon in that mode, and Rillaboom really doesn't want to work in the sun mode. But then if you look at the sun mode...
Tier 1 Pokemon's in the sun.
Yeah, but then Charizard absolutely wants to be in the sun mode, and I just think there's some issues with this team trying to do too many things. If it was just a slightly more focused team, I think it would be better. I know the Ludicolo pick was personally a snipe from me, but I do think that it doesn't work on this team as well as he wants it to work on this team. Like, it's very cool, and the reason I didn't think Ludicolo would get picked in the last round is because I didn't see another team that would use it well. Then Joshy picked it, I'm like, oh, Sableye, that makes sense. Then I'm like, oh wait, Sableye Charizard, that doesn't really make sense. And I kind of stand by that. Like, lots of output, lots of cool techie Pokemon, and I think it's going to be a really powerful team, but I do think that the things that it wants to do that are opposing to one another will limit him each week in team building, if that makes sense. I think that's going to be the biggest limiting factor, is that a lot of his things can't be done at the same time, which means he's going to have a really narrow team, and then you'll know exactly what's coming on team preview.
Right.
Instead of having the flexibility that he thinks he's going to have with the Ludicolo and the Charizard. But beyond that, like, obviously powerful, obviously good support options, not incredibly soft to Trick Room, like a little bit soft, but Berserker's really good. Double can just wall some stuff out, so can Rhydon. Speed tiers aren't great, but the Drift Bloom really makes up for that. So Yeah, I think it deserves its placement here, but I'm really nervous about dual weather because I've never been a fan of it, and I think it's incredibly high skill cap on a week-to-week basis, both in building and play. For moderate reward, it's not a high skill cap like if you get it right, you're going to auto win. It's high skill cap, and it'll give you a moderate reward if you do it right, but if you do it wrong, it's going to cost you the match. But moving on, we've got the Shadow Ducks, coached by Ed. Here we've got the G-Max Cinderace, Whimsicott, G-Max Inteleon, Lucario, Cofagrigus, Rotom-Fan, Dragalge, and then other Pokemon. No, I'm kidding. Dugtrio, Piloswine, Garbodor, G-Max, and Pikachu. But in reality, the top 7 and probably Piloswine are the big part of this team. Dugtrio, maybe a little bit, but Garbodor, G-Max, and Pikachu are going to be pretty irrelevant to this. So this is really a 9 Pokemon team that we're looking at, which does cost it a little bit. But this fast mode's great. You've got beat up Lucario options, you've got Tailwind and Fake Tears for Inteleon, you've got Tailwind for Cinderace. Like, this team, if it's going fast, is going to be crushing. It's also got a really good Trick Room mode with Cofagrigus and Tier 4 Dragalge, which is...
That's insane.
Yeah,
that's insane.
That's insane.
Dragalge should not have been Tier 4, guys.
No.
Adaptability Max Wormwind in Tier 4 with that kind of special defense is not a Tier 4 Pokemon. No. Dragalge is
so
at worst, at best, slightly worse than Drampa, and I do mean slightly. Like, which Drampa's a whole tier higher, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it is so good.
And,
and you said that Emolga is Dollar Store, Zapdos Rotom-Fan is like Walmart brand Zapdos.
Yes, I would say so. Walmart or Target,
Yeah, which is actually really good as a max option. He's got Cofagrigus again, Fake Out Immune, Trick Room. It's going to be decently consistent, especially when you don't know if there's going to be a fast mode or a slow mode coming. Mm-hmm. So this team, if it's going first, is really, really tough to beat. And I liked it a lot looking at it, but the biggest issue with this team is that Max Quake exists.
Mm-hmm.
And this team is really soft to it. He's got a lot of special attackers, and his physical attackers are also weak to Max Quake. Rotom-Fan can't cover everything by itself. And yeah, I mean, that's the gist of it. If this team's going first, it's crushing. If this team's going second and the opposing team has Max Quake, this team's probably not winning. So he needs to make sure he always has the speed control, which he does have probably the best tools for speed control in the league. But man, Max Quake just sucks so much for this team, and that's really what it boils down to. Like, if Max Quake wasn't a move, this would maybe be the best team in the league. But what do you think, Ryan?
I would agree. Yeah, it's the Max Quake weakness. I think that's even what I said to Dan when we were discussing PRs. I wrote down this team. I wrote down all these incredible pros, and then my 2 cons were some of the low tiers aren't that awesome, and yeah, Max Quake is a little terrifying. There are some picks here I like, though in the low tiers. I do want to clarify that. As the resident person who's maxed a Pikachu, I do like Pikachu. It's actually got a pretty nice support move pool for this team. I actually think like Focus Sash support set is kind of the one I would lean towards for this team. Just giving you some fake out pressure and some charm and stuff like that. And taking some of that pressure off the Inteleon's really nice. Garbodor G-Max, you can bulldoze weak armor with a couple things on this team, so it can kind of be cheeky, but it's not that consistent or great. Piloswine is okay, but I don't love its typing. And Dugtrio, I don't know what it's doing here, other than trapping. The top core of this team is pretty just ridiculous, and there's definitely a lot of good value picks throughout this team. But the Quake weakness is really the big thing. Like, it's really hard for when the physical threats are Cinderace, Lucario, and then the special threats, are that Inteleon really is kind of the big one. It's like, okay, I'm a little worried about what that looks like. So good luck playing Excadrill if you do. But otherwise, I think you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Pretty much the easiest team to break down. Awesome dies to Max Quake. So in number 3, I'll let you take it. It is Otto's team, the Trixie
I really like this
Tricos.
team. Yeah, this is a really interesting team, and I actually think some people are underrating it a bit. I think it's really good. So this is Arcanine, Mimikyu, Dragonite, Jolteon, Kangaskhan, Poltegeist, Tangrowth, Pangoro, Aggron, Cottonee, Walrein. So I really like this team. Definitely a more bulky archetype of team. This team is not really as much like a lot of the things here can kind of soak damage and support really well. So Arcanine Mimikyu is a good example. Those two can nerf especially physical attackers into the ground. And in a division where a lot of the good value picks are physical attackers, that's really big. So the ability for just those two to take down output, I think Dragonite was a fantastic pick. Dragonite's so strong in this format. You get rid of the legendaries, and Max Dragonite is just an absolute nuke with Airstream. It's a really tough Pokemon to beat. Jolteon is an excellent fast support for this team, and really helps the speed tiers out a lot. Both as a support mon and even as a max option. It's really good. Kangaskhan having Scrappy Fake Out is excellent. It's also in of itself a pretty solid max option if needed. Poltegeist, I actually really love the Poltegeist on this team, notably with the Mimikyu, because being able to Shadow Sneak, Weak Armor, a Poltegeist Weakness Policy, and then just have it auto sweep is really fun and very funny. And then it can also Shell Smash next to Tank Growth. So in general, Poltegeist is like really scary, and I'm increasingly being sold on support Poltegeist as well. It's got some really good moves in its supports its move pool, and your opponent kinda is forced to target it down so it doesn't get out of control. And on a team like this, I really like that. Tangrowth is, again, good redirector. I like how it pairs with Arcanine in particular. If you want to go max Arcanine, I like that option. Pangoro is a really nice, like, low-tier kind of Trick Room sweeper option. Sort of same with Aggron. Cottonee is very, very value. The only thing it doesn't have over Whimsicott is Tailwind and its Frailty. Very, very solid Prankstermon for the tier, and Walrein is a really, really good, bulky, I'm gonna click Icy Wind every turn Pokemon, and that's actually really good on a team like this, where some of the speed tiers are a little bit more in the middle. Actually, what really ties this team together for me is that Mimikyu. Being able to set the Trick Room, being able to activate the Weakness Policy, being able to beat up into the Arcanine, and then in of itself being able to, like, click Sword Stance and absolutely sweep a man, you know, like... I've used Mimikyu quite a bit myself, and this is probably one of the best Mimikyu comps I've seen. Really supports it well. I really like this team top to bottom. I guess my one critique of it is that even with having a lot of versatility and having a lot of different options that are all pretty consistent throughout, each individual Pokemon does have ways to sort of deal with it. In that, like, a lot of things here have something exploitable about them, if that makes sense. Dragonite, it's got the 4x Ice weakness. Poltegeist, you just gotta hit with the right coverage move. Tangrowth has a low Spadef. Aggron has 4x weakness. Pangoro has 4x weakness. If you can fake out Cottonee and he doesn't protect it, then that thing kind of becomes a dead slot. And Mimikyu, if Mimikyu is, I think, the reason this team gets number 3, in my opinion. But if you can shut down or find out the Mimikyu set game 1, I think games 2 and 3 get much easier. But overall, I love this team. Really, really big props to Otto. I think this was one of my favorites.
Yeah, this is a very solid team. I think it's got good typing, good bulk, good speed tiers. Speed control isn't the best, but Mimikyu is a really good Trick Room setter that does counteract a little bit of that, and it's got some good Icy Wind options as well. Yeah, I don't really have major complaints about this team. I think you covered most of it. It's just solid from top to bottom, can do a lot of things, and there's a lot of pieces that can fit well together. I think you have to prep for all 11 Pokemon on this team, and
Yes.
it's not incredibly soft to either Trick Room or Tailwind, and there's no single max move that just generally beats it. So,
No.
pretty obvious, solid. Like, yeah, this team could have had an argument for one of the other top 2 spots.
I would say so. I'd say top 3 for me was like top 3 was a bit of a toss-up between the top 3 teams, but this is just where this is kind of just what I felt like when I put the teams in order, if that makes sense. I think there's definitely an argument for any of the top 3 in their respective slots, I think.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But moving on, I'm going to let you take this next team again because
And
it is
finally not
my
number
team.
1 in his own PRs. Yay! Rejoice, everyone.
That meme doesn't even make sense. Like, I'm usually not.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, we are in VBA though a lot of the time.
In VBA,
this time we're
yes.
not. So this team: Metagross, Goodra, Vikavolt, Diggersby, which we'll talk about Diggersby in a second. Dusknoir, Mandibuzz, Pelipper, Hitmonchan, Kabutops, Morgrem, and Avalugg. So I would like to go on my tangent about Diggersby. I think Diggersby was probably the best value pick on the tier list. And I don't think there's... So, okay, to anyone listening, Jolly Diggersby has the same speed and same attacking stat as Adamant Landorus T. It doesn't have a 4x weakness, and it has debatably better coverage with the elemental punches. And max strike to lower speed to make up for its not amazing speed. That's in tier 3. Okay? Diggersby, in my experience, and in all the leagues I've done, is in tier 2 and performs well in tier 2. It made a tear in PDPL, it's made multiple tears in MDL, it's done really well in GLDL on a few occasions. Like, it is a real beast of a draft Pokemon, and having that in tier 3 was kind of an insane steal. And that's kind of really what your team was. We really tried to maximize value on the tier list. Now, the team does have problems, and I will get into those in a bit. But I do want to just say that across the board, value is pretty good. I think Metagross is one of the best tier 1 Pokemon. I think pretty and arguably Diggersby's probably the best tier 3, or at least up there for best tier 3. Pelipper in tier 3, it was pretty insane. Even if we're pairing it with Kabutops, which isn't as optimal as something like a Ludicolo or a Kingdra, I do really like it. I think Morgrem in tier 4 is an insane steal, and the fact that literally no one in the other division has grabbed tier 4 Morgrem is insane. If you're listening to this and you're in the other division and you're like, hey, I don't like my tier 4 Pokemon, grab Morgrem. It's Prankster dual screens with Eviolite, and it's so strong. Avalugg, I think, is a relatively good value for our tier 5 pick as well. So top to bottom, this team has a rain mode. Metagross, it can facilitate really well in a couple different ways. I won't spoil that too much, but it can facilitate Metagross, trust me. Even if you just want to talk Tailwind for Mandibuzz Pelipper, I think that's good. Goodra is a nice Goodra, Vikavolt kind of make up the special attacking core of this team, which I would normally be a little more critical of the Goodra, but because you have more Morgrem fake tiers in tier 4, I think Goodra is gonna do well here. And this team is very much a bulky offensive team in a similar-ish vein to Auto. I think the Dusknoir is super good. It lets the Metagross operate in Trick Room, and then your Trick Room move is actually pretty fleshed out. Having a Vikavolt for it and an Avalugg, I think, makes for a very, very threatening kind of core of Trick Room mons that are both special and physical. Mandibuzz is just really good. It's really hard to kill. It's really annoying. It can click Snarl and Tailwind and live forever. It's just an annoying Pokemon, and Foul Play is really nice. Pelipper Kabutops is a really nice budget rain mode. I mean, I don't love Kabutops as much as you do, but that really helps out with one of the critiques of the team we'll get into in a bit, but it does help out the speed tiers a lot, and I do think they synergize well together. I think Morgrem is really what ties this team together.
Morgrim allows for Metagross to pop off, it allows for Gudor to pop off, it helps Vikavolt out, it helps Diggersby out. Like, it's perfect. It helps out all of the offensive Pokemon on this team for so little. And then Avalugg, I think, is a good tier 5. So this team, I think, top to bottom is great value. I think it hits like a truck. I think the Pokemon on it are good. It's got multifaceted modes. It does have problems, though. Defensively, this team has some very awkward things. It is a defensively very awkward team. It's got some good defensive synergy and then some really bad defensive synergy. I'll let our opponents kind of figure that out a little bit more. I don't want to spoil too much, but in general, there are some weird type weakness overlaps on some of the cores on this team, and some also good defensive synergies. It's pretty weird from like a just what's weak to what kind of standpoint. So I do think that something we've knocked some other teams for is that defensive synergy, and I think this team can be knocked for it. And actually, my biggest knock against the team, and the reason I did not put it number 1, is the speed tiers are kind of bad. The slow-mo doesn't go quite as slow as you want it to. For Trick Room, it's not under base 30. So even though some of these Pokemon operate well in Trick Room, it's a little slow. And then the Tailwind setters themselves are slow. So Mandibuzz and Pelipper are not fast Tailwind, which does hurt this team a bit too, I think. I think that some opponents might see this as an opportunity to kind of bulk out their own Mons, especially some of their faster Mons, where they can invest more bulk because they don't need to have as much speed to beat your speed. That said, though, the fact that there are 2 Tailwind setters here, a really good Trick Room mode, and Morgrim, and also just the threat of Kabutops and Rain does help that weakness out substantively enough that I don't think it's as big a deal. And the team's really bulky, so it kind of gets around that. But I think it's my biggest knock against the team is really the speed tiers. I think that opens up a lot to opposing opponents in the prepping side of things, which I do not love. But overall, I mean, this team's so strong. It's really hard to beat all of the modes on this team, and he can kind of just slot them in however he wants. And the whole team is similar to the auto, which came before in this team. I think every single Pokemon on this team is a massive threat, and I think you need to prep for all of them, which I can't say for a lot of teams. So, nice job.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid team overall. I will note Avalugg's speed tier is 28 as a Trick Room threat.
Yes, it is.
Avalugg is a real Pokemon.
But Vikavolt's the best.
I will not stand for Avalugg erasure. It was my plan week 1. I don't know if it will ever be my plan again. So unfortunate that forfeit happened, but will not stand for Avalugg erasure. But yeah, obviously solid team top to bottom. Highest speed is base 80, so does not check my speed tier boxes the way that I normally like. But again, with the way the tier list was distributed, the Pokemon that were greater than speed 100 were so disproportionately put into tier 1 and tier 2 that a lot of teams are going to have that speed tier issue. It's
actually multiple teams have it. I mean, even like all top 3 teams, like, yes, Auto had like Jolteon and some stuff and Mimikyu, which those are faster Pokemon. Outside of those, like his teams, like just kind of across the board, there's not a ton of teams with a ton of great speeds. There are some. The Snarls have really good speed tiers and a few others, but like in general, kind of not optimized speed tiers is just a thing on this list.
Not good speed tiers and not good special attackers, which is why even the Vikavolt is not great value in tier 2 just in a vacuum. No, as a special attacker, like that's sort of the bullet you need to bite a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you covered most of it. Don't want to go too much in depth about my own team, but I will talk about Team Admin Abuse, the Beantown Binnacles, coached by Theo. I say Admin Abuse, and Theo I will not hold to that standard as much as some of the other coaches, because he said, I disagree with a lot of these tier placements and I'm going to pick them, which I can absolutely respect, but Corviknight Gmax in tier 3, massive value, probably the second best thing in tier 3 behind Diggersby. Crawdaunt in tier 5, insane value. Copperage in tier 4, great value, like Theo took advantage of the tier list that he helped to create, and although and why I don't ding him as much for it is because he said I disagree with a lot of these placements, so I'm going to take them. It would be very different if he just put these Pokemon there, and then he's like, yeah, I'm going to take them because I know they're insane value, and he tried to put them there, but I know that was not how he did it. But man, this looks like team admin abuse.
Yeah, a little bit. It's a little crazy.
This is a great team, top to bottom. Rotom Wash, Togekiss, Marowak, Meowstic M, Corviknight, Cursula, Centiskorch, Copperajah, Executor A, Crawdaunt, and Ditto. So, Rotom Wash, Togekiss, there's not a huge amount of power unless you're running Crit Kiss right away, but those two really serve to set the rest of this team up. Marowak, I think in Tier 2 is a bit of a weird value, especially when something like Diggersby was Tier 3. But it works on the team. Meowstic is a great prankster option for this team with screens and fake tiers that'll support both of the tier 1 options, which are both special attackers. Corviknight, like I said, insane value in tier 3. Cursula works very well as a Trick Room attacker, as does the Copperajah. Executor as a setter isn't my favorite Trick Room setter in the world, but you do have redirection from the Togekiss. So overall, like, phenomenal team, top to bottom. Like I said, any of the top 3 to 4 teams are pretty close in rankings, but I do think there's a very solid argument for Theo's team to be number 1 because of the amount of value that he has, and because he's got a very fleshed out Trick Room mode that's going to be tough to beat, and he's also got a slow Tailwind setter, but his slow Tailwind setter is supported with Follow Me if he needs it, and Marowak, Togekiss, and Rotom can all take advantage of that Tailwind, and Marowak can also operate under the Trick Room mode, and then Meowstic just supports everything well. Like, this is another team top to bottom, you have to be ready for anything, and everything hits hard, everything has decent bulk, and again, the speed tiers, not great, but the speed control really good, pretty similar to my team in that regard, but we decided to edge Theo on these rankings just a little bit. But what do you think about team admin abuse, Ryan?
Yeah, this team was to me kind of clearly the best one. Just from, like, obviously we're talking a theoretical standpoint, but Rotom Wash, Togekiss, I mean, like, that is Follow Me and ASCII plot is just there, and you can also just, like, max a Togekiss and have a Rotom Wash on the field. That's being annoying. Marowak pairs super nicely with the normally when you have something like Togekiss Corv, I would ding a little bit for the shared electric weakness, but you have a Marowak, so I don't have to, because Marowak can easily be on the field at the same time as these Pokemons, and Max Marowak is a huge threat next to either of these Pokemon. Follow Me Togekiss while Marowak maxes and gets off huge damage and prevents any Charms or Willows going into it. That's insane. Combine that with, okay, Marowak is next to Corv, okay, cool. Well, Corv can max Airstream or set Tailwind or whatever, and Marowak can either max itself or sit there or whatever and absorb electric moves for it. It's so strong. Meowstic is insane. I think Meowstic is really what's pushing this team over the edge. Having the ability to help Togekiss and Rotom get big damage off instantly with the fake tier support and having a fast fake out is so key. Cursula is really strong. I think that for the tier it's pretty good. It's got 145 special attack. It's 145, right?
Something like I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, it's like 145 special attack, max Phantasm, which is the most spammable move in the game.
Yep.
And then you have Centiskorch, which is on Pokemon I'm honestly pretty frequently pretty impressed by, and you only really have one Rock Weak Pokemon with the Togekiss, so I think you can work around that 4x weakness and really get a lot out of it. Copperajah is super, super good, especially because there's not a lot of ground weaknesses on this team. Between a Levitator, a Follow Me, Redirector, and Corv, you don't really have any huge ground weaknesses, so Copperajah can really kind of pop off. It's a really strong TRmon. I really like it paired with the Cursula in TR. I think Execute isn't the best TR setter like you were saying, but I like that it adds a Dragon Fairy Steel Core. I like how it looks next to a Togekiss. Really strong. Crawdon's one of the best Tier 5 Pokemon, period. It's really, really good value for Tier 5. Adaptability in Tier 5 is a little nutty, and it's got a really nice move pool to back it up. And Ditto is probably the mon I like the least on this team. I find Ditto to be kind of overrated and pretty gimmicky and hard to use, but it's pretty tight, especially if you know you're facing something with like a big setup threat potential. But yeah, I do really, really, really like this team. I think top to bottom, I'd say the biggest knock, like you said, a little bit of the speed tiers, but unlike your team, the combination of having the Meow Stick and the Follow Me really, I think, supplements that nicely. And now I do want to mention, because PRs are always about hypotheticals, right? So theoretically, I think this is the best team. Week 1, it played the Stunisks and got his ass beat, which is our lowest ranked team, and we are very aware of that. And we did not change the rankings after the fact. We did not alter anything after watching that week 1, because Curry prepped and played that super well and absolutely killed it. And huge props for that win. And these aren't predictive. These are all about how teams operate in theory. We don't take the coaches into consideration. So even though I literally know 12 beat 1 week 1, I still think that in theory, Theo has the best team in the division, so it gets number 1 in the standings, and that's just kind of is what it is. It's a great draft. So I'm aware that will be funny to a lot of people. I am sure we will get comments about it, and I don't care. I made this list before that game happened, and rather frankly, that just speaks to Curry's ability as a player, so good on him. Okay.
Yeah, and while you were saying that, I moved on to the final standings page. Our final standings for power rankings, which do not take into account week 1 transactions, were the Beantown Binnacles, Alexandria Arcanines, Trixie Tricos, Shadow Ducks, Jubilee City Jirachis, Midwest Megafaunas, Morenza Morpicos, Great Lakes Grim Snarls / Aces, Coughing Smokers, Salty Suicunes, Springfield Spoinks, and Worcester Sunfisks. Overall, like we said, I think a lot of those teams in the middle could have ended up in any order. I think the top 3 pretty well separated from the rest. And I do think Ed has some, in number 4, could say that he's very clearly number 4, but it depends how much you want to value that Max Quake weakness. But yeah, overall, pretty solid division top to bottom. Led by team admin abuse, although not to the extent of some teams in Johto when we get there. But yeah, any closing thoughts before I take us out, Ryan?
Yeah, nothing too big. Just that again, always keep in mind with PRs, we're talking theory crafting with the team, and I usually am pretty extensive with this sort of stuff. And I will say these PRs were overall pretty close. Like even though I think that the top 3 teams are all pretty clearly where they should be, like, I didn't give a 10 out of 10 to any team, which I have done before. I didn't even give a 9 to anybody. I think the top 3 were all, like, around, like, that 8 range, 8.5 range, whatever. So, like, and then, you know, the teams right below that are all basically in the 7s and, like, high 6s. So, like, just keep in mind that, like, this division, in my opinion, is extremely close from a team building perspective and from a team perspective, which means that I think that this is much more so anyone's game than some other divisions and VBA seasons in the past, even just from a drafting team building perspective.
Yeah, this isn't season 2 with the monstrosity that I drafted.
Yeah, like nothing like that. So.
But thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed our power rankings video. Please let me know in the comments below exactly why we're stupid dum-dum heads and our rankings are flawed. But otherwise, if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.